Whenever we come across a great article, we choose to turn it into a video story. And this time, we have an excellent one from the British Telegraph. Donald Trump's message, or rather, the message he transmitted from Vladimir Putin to Volodymyr Zelensky in Washington on Monday was stark. Accept the deal Russia is offering, because otherwise you'll lose the war. But if Moscow appears strong now, Ukraine and its European allies believe, it's partly because Trump's choices have made it stronger. Namely, his decisions to curtail U.S. military aid, interrupt intelligence sharing, and, above all, accept Putin's insistence on a peace deal before a ceasefire. And in fact, Russia is far from battlefield supremacy. Just hours before the Oval Office discussions, the British Ministry of Defense declared it would take 4.4 years of fighting at current rates of advance for Russia to capture the remainder of territory it has annexed. It would also, according to the MOD calculations based on Ukrainian estimates of Russian casualties, cost Russia an additional 1.93 million killed and wounded to achieve Putin's goals. That would be on top of the more than 1 million casualties it has already sustained. In other words, Russia could be headed for breaking points of its own. All of which raises the question, if Trump chose to throw his weight behind Ukraine, could he change the tide? Should the US president be asking not how much Ukraine must surrender, but how long Russia can last? Sam Green, professor of Russian politics at King's College London, points to two potential Russian breaking points: the military and the economic. Predictions about when either will come has become something of a mug's game, he cautions. Nor should we underestimate Russia's capacity to keep going. But eventually they do reach a pinch point. There are strains on the economy. There are strains on the military. A breaking point will come, he says. Because Trump is in a hurry, Putin has the ability to sort of shift that sense of emergency so that all of a sudden it feels like this sort of political breaking point for the West. Whereas, if there was a little bit more strategic patience and consistency from the White House, the opposite would actually be true. The British Defense Intelligence Assessment about the Russian rate of advance is meant for public consumption rather than real strategic analysis. Applying the same crude logic to British military performance in the First World War, one might have said in early 1918 that the Allies were decades from victory. By the end of that year, Germany had suffered a devastating defeat, and arguing about rates of advance and attrition in the previous 4 years were not much use to German negotiators at armistice talks. The problem is, wars are not linear, points out Rob Lee, senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and an expert in the Russian and Ukrainian militaries. Nor are they boxing matches to be decided on points. Nonetheless, Russia's advance is indeed painfully slow. Even a recent 10-mile infiltration near Dobropilya, while initially alarming for Ukraine, failed to achieve an operational breakthrough. It ended instead with hundreds of Russians being captured or killed. In the Oval Office, the US president led Zelensky over to an easel holding a large map of Ukraine showing the current line of control. The implication: to stop the conflict, the map will have to be redrawn. There was little progress on Monday, however, partly because Zelensky and his allies see that map in a very different way. Speaking after the talks, Emmanuel Macron said that in the past 1,000 days of war, Russian forces took less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. Those who are saying, the Ukrainians are lost, they will lose, it's total fake news, the French president said. As the Institute for the Study of War has pointed out, Russian forces are currently struggling to complete the encirclement or envelopment of Kupiansk despite 22 months of offensive operations. It took them 14 months to cover the 6.4 miles from the eastern to western outskirts of Toretsk, and 26 months to advance 6.8 miles from western Bakhmut to the western edge of Chasiv Yar. At the moment, time seems to favor Russia. Ukraine is not facing either imminent defeat or a collapse of the front line that would force it to sign a humiliating surrender, but the Russians are accelerating. Year on year, their pace of advance has picked up in 2025 compared to 2024. And while Ukraine has serious problems with manpower, Russia still has a steady supply of men to replace battlefield losses, which, according to Britain's defense intelligence, currently stand at 1,060,000, including 250,000 killed or missing, presumed dead. The recent Russian infiltration at Dobropilya shows that Ukraine's drone units, despite their remarkable effectiveness, cannot stabilize the front alone in the absence of sufficient infantry. For now, however, the Russians are struggling to translate their dominance in infantry into decisive advantage. Russia's vulnerability is simply that they are far too slow and they don't have the force quality, nor do they employ the tactics to achieve a major breakthrough. So their overall approach is deeply inefficient and costly in terms of manpower. The political leadership doesn't care about this, but Russia does not have limitless manpower either. That's a myth. It also does not have limitless time. That's another myth. And this is an excellent thought from General Ben Hodges. Russia's vastness was its historic strength. It is now its vulnerability. Russian air defenses cannot protect all of its oil-gas infrastructure against Ukraine's increasingly effective long-range precision strikes. Russia struck a residential building in Kostiantynivka with Fab 250 aerial bombs, local administration head Serhiy Horbanov said. Russian sources have published footage of today's strike on a residential building in Kostiantynivka. Terrorists. Tucker Carlson agrees with a guest on his show who says, "It turns out I think the story we got about World War II is all wrong. One can make the argument that we should have sided with Hitler, not even trying to hide it."
And it started when I read a book by Diana West, who would be good if you interviewed her. And it's this all revisionist history of World War II. And you go, well, why would you want to read that? Well, it turns out I think the story we got about World War II is all wrong, actually.
I think that's right.
And then I read about FDR, and FDR's right-hand man was a Soviet spy.
Certainly was.
Right? And therefore...
Confirmed.
We should have been... One can make the argument we should have sided with Hitler and fought Stalin. Patton said that. So, and maybe there wouldn't have been a Holocaust, right? You know, but Stalin was awful by any metric, and we weren't his ally. The story is that there were a few missing American soldiers at the end of World War II in Russian territory.
No.
15 to 20,000 were missing, and we left them there. And then you read about Pearl Harbor. We all sort of know the Pearl Harbor story is not what we were told, but I dug into that, and you find out we knew to the morning that Pearl Harbor was going to get attacked. Stalin knew it was going to be attacked. He wanted us to take the Japanese off his flank, and FDR's right-hand man was okay with that because he was a Soviet spy, right? Then I read about FDR in the Great Depression. You find out that every single penny he spent trying to help Amity Shlaes, the forgotten man, was spent to buy votes. Every last penny. He was a sociopath. And the only thing he could do was lie. He was a compulsive liar. His inner circle had to constantly cover for his lying.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comment section. The membership link is in the description.
Rescues every day. We had a guy last week at 6 rescues in 6 days. You know, he's doing the job every day.